What's the difference between dictatorship, democratic government, Republican government? When we say this is a Republican, this is a republic, this is a democracy, it's all different form of how a government is set up, how it's run. Before I start, please remember to subscribe. Democratic government means when the majority rules. Republican government means there's a minority that rules. Dictatorship is technically a sole ruler, but it could be used in different terms as not necessarily sole ruler. And then there's different types of governments, but very uncommon, the other types of governments. Now, let's not get confused about the parties like the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, because they just names for a party, has nothing to do with the actual factor of policies or anything to do with the form of government. So there exists such thing as a dictator. There's one person, a sole ruler, a king. I think as of today's day, there's only one country has such thing. That's Saudi Arabia. There's like literally a sole ruler. There's nobody to oppose him, and that's basically a dictatorship. Now, dictatorship does not necessarily have to be bad. It could be, depends on what the king is. If the king is a good person, it will be good, and the king is bad, it will be bad. The fact has shown that most of the time has been that most dictators and most throughout history have been terrible people and done terrible things. Republican government means when a minority rules, that there's a few elites, and between them they make the decisions of the country. They always have one person they put on top, ahead, like the president, the chief, whichever way they use it. It could be the prime minister, but that is basically a republic government. A democratic government means when the majority rules. The majority rules means it goes by the people are making votes. Now, a real democratic government does not even exist, because a real democratic government would have been literally would have been elected one chief, who he is just operating the government. It's like he's just running the government, and every time that something comes up, we'll make a vote, schedule a day, everybody goes to vote. If the majority of people vote in favor of the law, that law becomes law, and if everybody votes against it, then it becomes no law, or the same thing is about revoking an existing law. Now, such a kind of system simply cannot work, because if you're going to make such a system, one day it will be like this, and tomorrow will be the opposite. One law will come into place, and then the next day it will just be repealed, because it will just go by wind, because most people are indecisive, and most people don't even know anything about law, and they don't even know reasoning of law. They don't understand anything regarding law, so it will be a disaster. That's why every democratic government has set up a system that the people are voting for parties. Besides the United States is not necessarily a democracy, it's actually more of a republic. Now, the United States, the majority does not rule. It does not work this way. It's actually ruled by districts, and it turns out that a lot of elections, both presidents and Congress and Senate, the majority of people could have voted from one side, and the other side actually had a bigger hand in the House, or even the president. The reason why that is because the founding fathers sat down and said the first thing: democracy is the worst thing, because most people have no clue what to vote for. Now, if we're gonna put a democracy in place, before we know it, there's gonna come one person, blow a whole wind, and takes over the whole government. So they wanted to have a long-lasting government that could last for generations and even centuries. So that's why they came up with the idea of putting together a democratic and republican system. So the government should be more of a republic, that the majority shouldn't rule, but everybody votes for those minority. So everybody could run as well. It's not necessarily that there's elite class and only they could run, and you could choose from the elite class. Everybody could run, but it's not going to go the majority. So if someone comes and blows a whole wind, the other person could win, or the opposing parties could win. That's why also they made the concept of dividing the government in three branches, executive, legislative, and judicial. Sorry, I cannot pronounce exactly the word judiciary, because the one force should fight against another force. So whenever if one goes in one direction, the other one should be able to oppose them, and nobody should be able to have full control. So but the main thing is, in the United States, there's no such a thing like someone can come just blow a wind and just overthrow the government overnight. In most countries where there's parliamentary, like in England, Canada, most countries have more that system of you vote by party. In those countries, someone could actually come and overthrow the government just by winning the majority of the votes and just overthrow the government. This is part why Hitler had the ability of overthrowing the German government, because the majority rules. And even though he didn't have a majority in the House, which is a very weird thing because he did not win by the majority, he was just a chancellor, but he had so much power, he was the strongest party from all parties, and he was able to overthrow it. Part of it came because the majority rules. So the United States is probably the longest lasting system, as in one direction, being in more or less the same way the founding fathers set it up. There was some minor changes, but the main system of three branches of the government, the president, Congress and Senate, and then the Supreme Court, it's all coming because the majority doesn't rule. So, and it's divided in power, so all the combination does not let anyone to overthrow the government. There was one president, President Roosevelt, FDR, he tried to overthrow the government. That's a whole story for itself, and he failed because of the whole system of America. In other countries, he would have succeeded. Now, what is fascism? Fascism is a very controversial term, because fascism has been around over 100 years, and every time someone doesn't like someone else's political opinion, oh, you're a fascist. In reality, the few countries who were fascist, such as the Nazis in Germany, Mussolini, and then in Spain, I forgot the name of that the dictator, it turned out to be a militant government with a single party. So basically, the fascist party came in, they overthrew the government, took over the whole thing, and they made a militant government as sending around people and showing everyone there's a government in place, and if you don't listen, you're getting beat up. So fascism is a form of dictatorship. Now, communism and socialism is a form of what the government is doing, not necessarily how the government is operated, because you could have a communist government or socialist, which is basically the same. We'll talk about it at a different time. Communist and socialist government, which is run through a democracy, and you could have it run through a republic or a sole ruler. It has nothing to do one with each other. So this is just a basic understanding of what the difference between democratic and republican. And I found to be very weird when people are saying, oh, you're destroying our democracy. I'm like, democracy and freedom are not the same thing. You can have a democratic government being a dictatorship. Democratic government does not necessarily have to be a free country. If the majority of people will vote for people who want a dictatorship, it will still be a democracy, then the majority rules, but it will be a dictatorship. I mean, automatically, if that happens in the countries that this kind of stuff happened, which it happened in a couple of places in the world, then the party in charge became in charge, and then they took over. But saying you're destroying our democracy means you're destroying our form, our government system, not even the government system. And that is a very interesting thing to say. You should say you're destroying our freedom, because freedom is freedom, not democracy is not freedom, and freedom is not democracy. And the same thing about saying you're destroying our republic, which usually people with a little bit more sense will say you're destroying our republic. That means you're destroying the government system. That makes more sense to say. I hope you all understand, and we'll continue explaining more about communism, socialism, capitalism in the next video. Enjoy.